So if you were to ask me how long I've known Kevin Simpson, it literally feels like forever. He's been a contributor and a supporter of the Black expat, and I've had the privilege of speaking at several events he has hosted over the years. And he's almost always the first person I think of and reach out to when I need insight on issues related to diversity, inclusion, and international schools. But in reality, I first met him in 2020 in the aftermath of what proved to be a pivotal year, when it seemed the work we were both doing intersected. Kevin is a teacher, advocate, community builder, and a leader. He is the founder of the Association of International Educator Leaders of Color, also known as AIELOC, which is devoted to amplifying the work of international educators and leaders of color with a focus on advocacy, learning, and research. Kevin launched the organization in 2017 after a colleague shared her experiences on Facebook of being discouraged from applying for a leadership position at her international school due to her race and country of origin. It was from that story that a vibrant, engaged global community was formed and has since spawned international conferences, mentorship, and fellowship programs, a recruitment service, and more. In this episode, you'll hear his early years in Flint, Michigan, and how his career interests took a detour in college. You will hear about a coveted and unlikely internship in Washington, D.C. that laid the groundwork and skills for the advocacy work he does today. And you'll also hear him share why he's out to disrupt and dismantle the systems that gatekeep. If there's one thing you'll get from Kevin, it's absolute realness and the inability to hold back. Welcome to the Global Chatter. All right, we're back with the latest episode of the Global Chatter podcast, and I feel like if you've been in these Black expat streets, you've heard me say this name because for whatever reason, I either reference him, call him up. Occasionally he shows up on an event. Sometimes I show up at his event. You never know what's going to happen, but he's a name that if you have been in this space for a while, he's not a new name. It's almost like Christine Job for me in terms of thinking about who has been a contact, who has been a partner, who's been a friend. And so Kevin Simpson, welcome to the chatter officially, even though you have been referenced in many episodes.
Well, thank you. It's good to be on the chatter.
And it's funny because when I reached out to you, right before I reached out to you, I thought to myself, I've never actually had him tell his story, which is wild because I feel like I've told parts of my story in your platforms and with your groups and your spaces, which we will talk about that kind of amazing work because you really are your own lane with that. Like, sometimes people say folks are in their own lane and I'm like, no, there are people who they are like one or one of two and you're really in like a lane. But I realized that I don't think we've done kind of the personal side of your space and really how it ties to your work. So I'm excited to have you here. It'll probably be crazy. It's all good. We'll just roll with whatever happens.
Exactly.
So, all right. Where are you currently in the world right now? Where are you sitting?
Currently sitting on stolen land here in Chicagoland to be.
Yeah. There's an intro.
Oh, yes. Tell it like it is.
Not surprising, but there's an intro. But where are you normally? And I know you travel all the time, but where are you typically based?
Yeah, so typically I'm based out of Dallas, Texas. So I've been there for a few years now.
That's home base? Okay.
That's home base. I claim that. Claim that place is home base for now.
Good for you. So
I know.
A lot of places I ain't claiming, but I can say I was there. And so tell us a little bit, where did you grow up?
Yeah. So I always like to say I'm a kid from Flint, Michigan. Grew up born and raised in the late 70s. Mm-hmm. And so got to see, the 80s and 90s of Flint.
Wow.
High time when General Motors was booming. A lot of my family worked in the factory. We were part of the mass migration from South Carolina up to the Midwest when they found out that they were hiring. You had a high school education.
Yeah.
You had these interests. My aunts and uncles all worked in, Fisher Body, General Motors,
wow,
different industries, Ford, from Detroit to Flint.
And I think you touched on something I tend to end up asking a lot, particularly of Black Americans, and it's that migration move, right? Whenever I talk to folks, I'm like, where did your people start? And every now and then they're like, where they are is where they started.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think especially when you talk about the Midwest, what was Flint like in the 70s and the 80s? Obviously, it's been in the news for some not really nice reasons.
Right.
But as someone who's from Flint, what was Flint like?
You know what? Growing up as a kid there, I mean, it was booming. I remember the malls, downtown, church, social functions, concerts. There was always something going on in Flint. And obviously a lot of the economy centered around General Motors. So, I mean, Auto World we had, like there was always something going on. There were opportunities at the different universities. So you had Kettering, formerly GMI, University of Michigan, Mott Community College. So it was booming. So like my youth years, we always had something between Flint and Detroit. There was always something going on. It's like there was no need to leave the area.
Right. What's fascinating, I think, is when I hear people describe kind of their hometowns and when they grew up. We hear modern day, and often what's interesting, I think, with talking, especially with Black folks, a lot of the places where they grow up, there's some negativity attached to it, but we don't always hear like the positive, and we don't always hear the fuller story, right? Yep. And so I think you're alluding to the fact that as the economy changed, right, and I guess as people sort of shifted in terms of the way they worked and the opportunities, that probably had an impact in the area, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. So you saw that, the migration out. Obviously, when you saw General Motors shifting jobs out, you saw people leaving and fleeing. I mean, that was, after I finished student teaching, because I was student taught in Flint. We were called Flint turns. And so I know. So you taught for one, right? I know. So you taught for one full year as a part of the Michigan State University program. And you started your master's program. So you got graduate credits, but you also were a student teacher. And I remember, the job opportunities weren't, plentiful, and even that same year when I was looking, folks in Detroit and some of the other areas were getting pink slipped. And so, when I was beginning my education career, I had to look outside of the state for opportunities.
Wow. And you know what? Let me ask you this question, because you talked about the teaching. Was your population predominantly underrepresented, as we would say, minority, or was it majority students? So in the U.S., that would be white for those who aren't in the U.S. Or was it a mix? Like what was kind of the makeup of the community in general?
Yeah, great question. So Flint, where I taught, it was predominantly African-American, predominantly Black.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And was that reflective of Flint as a community?
Yeah.
Or was there division somewhere?
Yeah. During that time, there was, for the most part, you'll see there's Flint Power, so the Catholic school that's there, and that sort of moved from one spot to the next. So that's where you see more white folks going to school, but they're not necessarily living in Flint.
Okay.
So exactly. Yeah. So, but for the most part, the schools of Flint school district is predominantly Black, predominantly African-American.
So it seems like growing up, you grew up in Flint, went to Michigan schools, went to Michigan colleges, right? And then started teaching in the space. Wow. Okay. Did you know from a young age you wanted to be an educator?
I didn't. You know what? And
Wait, did you say not?
I'm gonna tell you, no. You could, if you asked me back in the day, especially when I was younger, middle school, high school, I feel elementary, didn't quite know, but and I feel like, grocery store, I'm like, ooh, one day I want to have and it wasn't really a career. It was like, oh, it would be fun to work in these different places where we would, frequent. But it was law. And it was interesting that it was civil rights law. So once I read and learned about Thurgood Marshall, Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, 1954, I just dove in and was all in. And so everything was around public speaking opportunities. It was around language. It was around literature. Obviously different stories of different individuals from around the world who'd overcome a challenge and a difficulty. So it's interesting because I remember most recently I was telling someone, I feel like part of what I do now at times is I'm a lobbyist. It's relationship work, getting to know individuals, organizations, sort of where they're at, but also where they aspire to be. And then how does it connect with the work that we're doing at AIELOC, which I know we'll talk about. So it was not originally education.
So what was it that kind of pushed you towards pursuing education then?
Yeah, great question. So my freshman year at Michigan State University, one of the, what was that? The third jobs that I had.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trying to figure yourself out.
Yeah, exactly.
So, once I figured out KFC, they were throwing away food after. Just being real and honest.
I mean, I worked at Arby's. I understand.
So you understand. Right. But once they said, the timer is over, we have to throw away this food. I'm like, that just didn't sit well with my spirit and being. So that was a day job.
Right.
And then,
come on now.
And then the survey research, I mean, it was fun to call people up and talk to them and try to get them to complete the survey, and I did well. But it was the Young Spartan program, or YSP, they called it at Michigan State, which was the eye opener into the world of education for me. And so I served as a student coordinator. So I was housed in an elementary school in Lansing School District. I worked directly alongside a principal. And I remember day one, Dr. Elizabeth Turpin, meeting, greeting, getting to know her. And she had this list. It's like, these are things I want you to work on during the course of, your time here, which was going to be like that semester. And then we would, renew and figure out if this was a fit. Well, most of that stuff was done within like 2-3 days. So she, was looking like, wait a minute, you started this, but it was really getting to know the teachers, connecting with them, getting to know the students that were in the building, and then creating and crafting programs for them. So I think that's where it was the aha of, this is actually fun. I'm having fun with, these teachers and these students and creating these writing clubs and math clubs, based on her big goals that she had for the school and collaborating with them. And so I hadn't even applied because I was originally pre-law, political science with James Madison College. It was a college within a college at Michigan State. Very competitive to get in. And then I had heard the College of Education at Michigan State was difficult to get in. Everyone said it. They're like, oh, it's difficult. If you don't get in by your second year, people leave and transfer to go to other schools to get in College of Education. Well, I applied my second year and got in, so got in, did their, process of, write your essays. And I had been working with the Young Spartan program. So I was able to talk about my experiences directly with that. So I got in and I started that journey and double majored with political science, pre-law, and education.
I was a poli-sci soc major, so I feel.
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, we were talking offline, and then one of the graduate degrees is in ed. So I'm feeling all of what you're saying, because I think similarly for me, people, right? Just what you said was really interesting about AIELOC, lobbying, advocating, relationship building, community building, strategizing, consulting. It's like, these are all these things that I can sort of see the roots in your story. And so even when you were working with that school in Lansing, what was sort of the makeup of that school?
Good question. Real diverse. So I had kids from like different backgrounds.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can imagine. And I love that, because especially as I'm thinking kind of the future you and what would come down the road, it's like sort of that preparation. Yeah. Did you, and this feels like we're going a little bit back, but I'm going somewhere up until that point in your life, right? You talked about your family originally coming from South Carolina, doing that, the Black migration, mass migration up to the Midwest. Did you travel either internationally or even locally?
Yeah. Great question. A lot of times our trips were like growing up. I mean, memorable trips were Florida, South Carolina, more summers. Visit like grandparents, family, aunts, uncles, family. Detroit. I mean, we went to Detroit. We had aunts, uncles.
Like, I've been to Detroit, and sorry,
it's different in the 80s now.
I mean, okay. It ain't Florida. It ain't South Carolina. But it's Detroit. Yeah. Go ahead. Yes.
Right. So those were, most of our sort of trips growing up, unless it was like a camp. So anytime we went to a different camp, it would be they were all over Michigan. I mean, there were
Yeah.
some of these rural cities. I mean, I went
Yeah.
to Michigan State for camp university. So there were a lot of times it was at a college. So I remember going to Grand Valley State, Saginaw Valley State, Michigan State, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. So all over the state of Michigan, even on up to the Upper Peninsula at times for like leadership.
You went to
stuff.
the UP?
To the
UP? Don't ask why I know about the UP. It's really random why I know about some UP. I actually know like 30 people from the UP. Don't. and they, y'all know, they got to show this is a Michigan thing. I was like, the first time they said, we're from the UP. I'm like, where's the UP? And they got to show me the hand. And
exactly.
Right. And I'm like, okay, good to know. I hear it's pretty.
It is pretty, especially in summer.
Right. Because I think winter is probably, not the wave.
Right.
And so, you graduate. I'm curious, what were you intending on teaching, or what did you end up teaching?
Yeah, good question. So Michigan State, we had experience-wise, you had middle school experience, you had elementary experience, heavy literacy, heavy mathematics. And so for me, I said, okay, I want to focus on elementary education before I sort of switched and started doing more focus on like math and tech. Okay. And we were, I think junior year, we were middle school classes in Lansing. And then I elected, because you could sort of elect what type of context you want to be in. And so I said, I want to be more urban and, most likely go back to Michigan. That was my thinking. And so I was in the Lansing public school districts versus Okemos, which was a little bit more suburban. So different context wise. And then before I student taught, I was in kindergarten. It was like 3 guys in the kindergarten class. So I had that range of experiences from
That's actually kind of amazing.
I know, K to 8.
Sorry.
K to 8, mostly all subjects. And then, graduated and went to, so even after I graduated, I went to Washington, D.C. because before I graduated from Michigan State, I got accepted as a White House intern. And so this is, I know, random.
Did you just slide that story?
So
you did do it.
And I
did.
Yes,
you did.
I did it. Yeah. It was like, and because I was not going to do it. So I was like, I'm getting ready to, do my internship in Flint. So I sort of veered in another direction, got this White House internship and took it. And did that.
Okay. I did not anticipate that. So let's talk about that for a moment. Who was president?
Oh, yes. So the year was 1998. Let's see if you know.
Oh, that would have been the end of the Clinton era.
Exactly. So I was there under President Bill Clinton.
Wow. What was that? Wait a minute. You said 1998.
I know. So you remember that year, right? I was in summer 98 before the fall, in the States. Yeah.
Did you see Monica?
I did not. Look, I did not. But she was before. Okay. She was before. But she was before. It was before us.
Yeah. That's why I was trying to do the math and I was like, no. You're right. That's when the legal part was rolling down. Right. It had already occurred.
Yeah.
Wow. I feel like I just want to leave that alone. But what made you? I mean, obviously it's a prestigious opportunity, right?
Yeah.
What made you want to do that opportunity, and what do you think you got out of doing that?
Yeah, no, great question. For me, it was because, again, like I said, I was like, oh, this was unexpected. I knew I applied for it. I didn't know I was going to actually get it. For me, my thinking was, okay, it's a few months. It was the summer, before getting ready to do my student teaching. So that was one. But 2, again, like you're saying, it was just prestigious. Like how many people, there's 206 of us that were selected out of how many thousands of people who applied?
Right. Nationwide. Yeah.
Nationwide. And then the whole, when you, arrived and figured out which office you would be working in. So there were 3 of us selected to work in the Office of Student Correspondence. So any student from anywhere in the world who sent a letter or student work or projects to the president, that was our office.
Oh, wow.
So you can only imagine. Yeah. The colors and the art,
the
and
crayons.
Everything. Oh, yeah. Some of everything.
From the clearly you're talented at 5 to clearly you know how to do your stick figures, but it's cute and we're going to look at it.
Yeah. So that was like, it was pretty amazing because I think at that point, and I have been working, college wise, but to be Number one in Washington, D.C.
This is where I wanted to go, actually. Let's stop in that number one, because I'm thinking at this point, whatever, been in the Midwest doing your thing.
Yeah.
I was born in D.C.
Yeah.
As you know, D.C. is something, well, gentrification is a thing.
Right.
But DC is still, and was at least at that time, predominantly Black.
Correct.
Right. There was a history and a culture.
Yeah.
Right. Especially if you know U Street, especially if you know some of the, if you know parts of Anacostia, like, you know what I'm saying? If you know that whole area up until Silver Spring into Maryland, there's a whole space there. And so I think I try to imagine for you, what was DC? I mean, yes, White House, cool, but what was DC an experience? Because because this country is so big, it's like traveling to different countries, even though you're an American, right? Yeah.
So it was, and I think I had I called her my big sister. So Toya, who's now Dr. Younger, she was a year ahead of me. Okay. And so she was the one that sent me the internship experience. She's like, oh, here's some DC internships if you want to apply. Yeah. And so she was working for Representative then Bruce Vento out of Minnesota. And she went through James Madison, pre-law, everything. She sent me those opportunities. So I had at least one contact there. So when I arrived there, I stayed, I think, with her at her flat for a couple of weeks before I went to student housing at Gallaudet University.
Yeah.
And so again, most days, I mean, we were working like full days. So you work full days in the old executive office building. You had access to the White House because they did our background, check, screen.
Of course, yeah.
Right. And then after leaving sort of the work environment, like you're saying, you're experiencing DC. And for me, I went to networking events. I went to learning opportunities. Because even they had stuff within the White House, our internship. They were like, hey, you can sign up to go on these different tours. You're going to have different officials from around the world come. And so and our director was very big on, hey, this is up and coming. I want y'all to take advantage of it. So she sort of pushed us to, make sure that we were signing up, taking advantage of things around the city during the day and during the evening. So I think there was always those networking opportunities. But again, I think the eyes wide open for me happened when, because DC, I still call it Chocolate City. So having a Black professional cadre around the city, I think that's what really planted the seed. Because when I interacted with individuals, obviously you're going to talk about where you're from and, what you do or whatever. But it's also, what are your other goals? Where do you see yourself? Yeah. So a lot of those conversations really were planted in, and was a seed into me, doing more when it came to education, doing more and when it came to school, and not saying like, okay, I just finished this, I'm going to do my student internship, and then what? And so I felt I met a great group of folks who just, that was the energy. That they were about, I'm thinking about law school. I'm thinking about this in political science. I'm thinking about this within education. So I felt like I was surrounded by so many individuals that encouraged me, to further my education and learning and growing and things like that. So that definitely was a value add.
And so I assume after that, you returned and got back on the path to teach.
Yep.
Did you return to Michigan or did you go somewhere else?
Yeah. Went back to Michigan, finished my Flint internship in the city. That's what we call
Fine.
Flint.
No, it was cute. Wow. Shout out to who put a lot of thought into that, but it worked.
Exactly. So did the Flint internship for a year and then started grad school. So after I finished that 1 year, I actually went back to Michigan State in full time because we had, I think it was like 12. We had so many credits you earned while you were, because you had classes and you were teaching full time. So I just went and decided to, over that next year and I think a summer almost, finish out grad school. Yeah.
And what did you get your master's in?
So it's in curriculum and teaching. So it's curriculum and instruction. Okay. Yeah.
And I feel like this is explains why you know a lot of stuff that you know on top of the experience. Yeah. And so there's going to be a point in your story, we'll get to it in a moment, where you go international.
Right. And which is interesting because at Michigan State, going back to that, when I went that summer, that was the next seed, because I met someone who was in my class who said, we were talking, introducing ourselves. He said, oh, when the summer's done, I'm going back to London. that right there was the beginning of the international school world. Because when he said that, I'm like, we need to have lunch.
Right. And you know what? And this would not be a surprise to you at all. The educators that I have come on here, clearly they have an international story. Mm-hmm. Many of them, there's maybe the one or two who was a third culture kid, right? Maybe, or had some kind of that story. But it is always that they met this one person from somewhere. They didn't even go to that place where that one person was, but they met this one person, and all of a sudden it was like, wait, I can do this. And I think especially for those who come from underrepresented groups, I think especially if you're Black or brown, right? You're not necessarily thinking, you know, I can take this and go somewhere. Mm-hmm. And there's always a question, and I maybe it's almost unfair, but there's always a question I always ask the Black educators, and I'm pretty sure you have answered this question because you have been asked. And it's always the question around when we get there around, okay, you've been teaching Black and brown kids here. You're nodding your head. I ain't even finished. Why are you going abroad and taking your skills? All right. So this is the question that, you know, I'm always interested in when people take their careers abroad. What was the catalyst that drove you to take your career abroad, and where did you go to first?
You know, going back to, you know, DC and government policy. So I've always been like, you know, ed geek policy wonk on that side. So anytime any major education shifts happen, I would literally sit and read No Child Left Behind, for example, you know, things of that nature.
Man, do you know how many children were left behind? Every time I see stuff, I'm like, oh, y'all, look at you, product of child's left behind.
I know.
Well, many a child. Yeah, anyway, carry on.
So I remember reading, you know, sweeping legislation coming for the entire U.S., you know, 2004, 2005.
Yeah.
And I just thought, like, this might be the time, which again, this is at this point, 4 years after I had met someone who looked like me, who was like, I'm going to London at the end of the summer when I was in graduate school. Mm-hmm. And then at that point, I had a mentee who was like, oh, I'm going to teach in Sudan. So I'm like,
Okay. I mean, kids need to be educated there too. It's just,
exactly.
Wow.
And so for me, I felt like, well, that might be the time, you know, to look at opportunities abroad. Since there's going to be some changes sweeping changes in the United States landscape. And then that's when I started to look, you know, and talk to my mentee around sort of the trajectory he took. And I learned about international school services. I learned about search associates. I learned about, back then, CIS was also doing recruitment. And I think I registered with, I didn't pay. So I registered with someone for free. I want to say it probably was like CIS. Someone was free.
Yeah.
And, you know, then it was like you sign up and you're in the database and they would send you information, you know, you can apply and things like that. And so I started, you know, people started to reach out, you know, about opportunities and teaching. So based on what I had ticked, was at that point I said, you know, either because I had been doing curriculum work in Fairfax County. So I've been doing curriculum work. I've been doing some coaching, school improvement work. At that point, I've been a teacher as well. Because I moved after Michigan, I went to Virginia. So I went back to DMV, as we call it, or DC, Maryland, Virginia area.
Virginia's better than Maryland. Sorry, my family lives in Virginia, so let me not talk about them.
I lived in all three.
I have lived in all three. I was born in one, and I'm biased. I was born in Howard. I feel like I say this every time I can mention DC on this podcast. I was like, I was born at Howard Hospital. Thank you. Anyway.
So ended up, you know, getting these different opportunities that would come through, you know, email and looking and seeing the schools and the companies. And I remember getting offered, I was like, wow, I got an offer in Egypt. I'm like, wow, I got an offer in Dubai. And like, wow, I got offers Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
And so for me, I figured, where would I probably not see myself going? that was the way.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, cause I'd heard of Dubai because at that point I had like a good friend in Michigan State was from there. Obviously I had heard of Egypt, but I'm like, Vientiane, Laos. I'm like, I don't know that much about,
That's how I got to New Mexico. Sorry. And back in the day, people still were like, when I was said I lived in New Mexico, do you need a passport? So I don't want anybody to get confused. I know. Once again, children left behind. Anyway, but that's the same way I got to New Mexico, real talk, because I had offers for other stuff. And I was like, yeah, I'd go to California. I'd go to, Virginia. I'd go to whatever. New Mexico. And this was before Breaking Bad was even a thing. So like it wasn't, nobody ever thought about it. And so, I understand how you got to Laos.
Exactly. And, they reached out, they were consistent with messaging. Any questions I asked, they answered. I did my Skype interview with the head of school, then John Ritter, still in contact with. And then they had said they're going to be in the Virginia area. So I said, okay, because at that point I was still looking, and they encouraged me. They were like, look, check out other schools and things, let us know. But I was in communication with them. And so when they came to the area and I met Jody, and I went through their website and everything, met with Jody Nilsson, who was then over the primary school. Great conversation, great questions. I like how she was asking vision and mission specific questions. Like, I'm like, y'all have specific questions y'all are asking. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't random.
Yeah.
I felt like, again, we were engaged in this intellectual conversation that I would want to be engaged in when it came to an international school, but also sharing like what they're working on. Like we're working towards this. We have some stuff around accreditation, but also they were saying, and we're going to have other leadership opportunities opening up. Sold right there. Sold right there. And so I was hired as a grade 5 teacher. And there were 2 of us. I worked with Lara. She was from, where's Lara from? Lara was from New Zealand. And then, and I mean, I had ambassadors kids from like Brunei, Australia in the class. And then those opportunities, they said, accreditation is going to be coming in next year. And we're probably going to have something around with, working with teaching and learning and curriculum coordinator. Applied for it and got it. And so, everything that they said, they delivered on, including, the whole process of transitioning from the States over. Like, it was smooth. I had a mentor, Bruce, that I had. They were answering questions. Joanne was there.
Wow.
Because I only had like a couple months. Like I want to say, once I said yes, it was like you got almost 3 months to get yourself organized out. You know?
And here's what I'm curious to know, right? So you, first of all, you make the decision to teach abroad, be an educator abroad, be a leader abroad. You make the decision to do it to go to a country where a lot of people don't necessarily know. They either have limited information or don't even know where it is and what it is.
Yep.
My immediate thought is, okay, Black man, what is your family and your friends thinking when you decide you're going to Laos, which may sound like an insect, right? And we were like, what?
Right. Vientiane, Virginia?
Where? Right. You know what?
I got everything. I remember those interactions.
Well, how was the reaction? What were people thinking?
I mean, again, I had the people who knew I was an adventurer, took these road trips, was always going somewhere. When I was 19, I won a free trip to Africa from Young Sisters and Brothers magazine. So, I mean, I'd been overseas, at that point.
Yeah.
But it was, so you had the people who weren't shocked. Like, oh yeah, we knew this was, then you had the people like, even my mom, like the family, that varied. But for most of my mom has always been like, go, do, live, be.
Yeah.
It's
actually really good.
You're out. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And so again, it was this range of reactions, but for the most part, people were supportive,
right.
People were like, where?
Yeah, right. Because like, I don't know where it is, but go ahead and do it. Right. Exactly. Well, and that's good because that's not always necessarily the case. Right. And I know that you work with educators and, you work with people coming from all different places and that's not necessarily the story. Right. Because there's that fear and that concern. Yeah. And so I think I'm trying to imagine what is life like, and you've traveled, but what's life like for a Black man in Laos?
It is interesting. So, and I mean, we hear this often that, when you're at the school, it can feel like a bubble at
Of
times,
course.
because you walk in the building and it's generally everything's in English,
Yeah.
speaking and everything. But once you leave that school,
Yeah. Yeah.
we had loud language class and they said, do y'all want to continue? And we were like, yes,
Yeah.
I would love to continue because when I leave the school, I need to have some functioning language,
Yeah.
And so that was great again, because they built that in, and that was like a core component of our being onboarded, which I love, because they did all that. It was like not just we were introduced to the culture, the country, obviously geography, but also the language.
Mm.
And we had language class for a couple of weeks, and we went out and used it after you learned it, which was great. But yeah, soon taught I was everywhere, which means you're tall, like soon taught I. So I learned that very quick.
Right.
I'm like, you pointing and you saying soon taught I. That means I'm tall,
Right.
But people were always friendly, wherever
Yeah.
I went, obviously, I got some of the stares, I got the, the height comparison, but
Yeah.
people were very friendly, very respectful, obviously trying to figure out where is he from.
Of course.
They were French colony, so
Mm-hmm.
it was so they're like, he's French, is he Canadian, is he American? Open my mouth, they figured out,
Right.
for the most part.
Right.
But yeah, it was it was, the thing I loved about it, it was small. It wasn't a big city. And so I felt like it was, for that being the first time living and working overseas, it was ideal. I didn't feel lost. I didn't feel like a number. I felt like there were places where I can go, and I got to know people within the community who had lived there, who were, from there beyond the confines of the school. And so I felt like that was definitely a plus.
So I think with that being sort of your first educator experience, clearly you had been teaching at that point, and you're going to move on and go to other countries. I am intrigued then, as we think about your current work, right?
Yeah.
What sort of sparked, because you worked in Laos, you worked in UAE, you did work in Qatar, you've been doing consulting, and that seems to be a thread throughout your career in general, right? But I am curious then, what were the things and the challenges you were starting to see, or maybe that you felt were happening, particularly working in these international school spaces, and particularly maybe with underrepresented educators and leaders?
Yeah, I think definitely one thing was visually, wherever I went, I was one of not many. So that representation was rare. And I hear educators now like, oh, if 10 years ago AIELOC was around, or if the association, was around, I probably would still be, abroad. And so I think that was a piece. But when it came to professional learning and professional development, training, again, wasn't a lot representation wise. So again, it was always seeing it, never really saying anything. And then it became, oh, the elephant in the room, or things that we don't really talk about, that was being spoken, I'd hear at times. And then obviously on the leadership side, same thing. So it's like you constantly saw the same people, white folk, all over. And I'm like, okay, we're in Asia. Okay, I'm now here in Africa and different places I would travel. And it was the same in a lot of these different contexts. And then I think sort of later, because the impetus of starting AIELOC was because one of our colleagues, a Black woman, was told, don't apply for that job. They want a white British man. So when that happened almost 6 years ago,
wow,
it wasn't just her story. It became all these other stories of, oh yeah, I was told, my hijab or my religion or being this or my accent was a reason why I didn't get this, or my passport, which country I came from, was why I couldn't proceed forward, or I couldn't, I wasn't considered for a leadership job. It was all these stories that, people were sharing. I'm just like, what is this? And so when I set up the Facebook affinity space for then what was called International Education Leaders of Color, that was the question. It was like, is this, or in starting to invite people in, having people invite people in who were identified as, Latino, Black, Asian, Indigenous, biracial, multiracial, that were working or want to work in the space. I was asking that question. Is this, y'all having the same experience? Just make sure like it's not just me and this is what I'm hearing. This is what happened to a colleague who I was serving as her reference for. which is how that got back to me, because I was asking her, like, she was applying for a higher level job as a head of a school. And when I checked in with her, that was what I was told. And I was like, huh? Like 2017?
Also, that's kind of bold. Look, can we talk about this for a moment?
Yeah, we can.
It's a little bold to just come out and say it, because I think some of us might be a little bit at least used to the dignity of the covert. Like, do you know what I mean? At least let's just massage this.
Right.
But for someone to very overtly tell someone, not that you're not qualified, not that we don't even think you can't do it.
Right.
We want this profile.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's optics, right? Because as I was speaking to whether that imaginary, well, it's not imaginary. There are plenty of white British men who are running schools, but that is speaking to the idea that they're actually good at what their job is by the way they look.
Yep. Exactly. So it's like, and she was beyond qualified. I'm like, startup, IB, you name it.
Yeah.
Directed. I'm like, what else could you do? You're number 2 at the school.
What region? What region of the world was this by?
Middle East.
You like, look, I'm gonna tell you. Oh, I know you don't care. You be like, look, let me tell you who it was. Who it was not. But so, and who, I guess, so here's the thing. You and I have talked about this stuff. So we're not brand new to this, right? But I'm putting it in the mind of people who are listening to this right now who don't understand the level of obstacles and challenges. So one of the things I've had Estelle Hughes on, love Estelle, because she's Cameroonian anyway. And she told a story beginning of this year, actually, that I think just kind of resonated with folks, where she talks about being invited to speak, being invited for opportunities. And because of that passport, she couldn't even get the visa. Right. Exactly. And because professional choices have been shifted because she's got that Cameroonian passport. And so can you shine a little bit, like, let's talk about for the uninitiated, because I want to make sure people get this. Can you talk a little bit of the very real challenges that you see Black educators and leaders face who are pursuing or trying to progress within an international school space?
Oh, yeah. So I have encountered folks who PhD and education, numerous years, so we're talking about 2 decades of experience, has been may have been like learning specialist, support, instructional coach, administrator, who've attempted to apply for administrator jobs, which be the equivalent, but from states or wherever, Canada, anywhere, in international schools, and taking a teaching job. So I've seen that numerous times. So I think that's probably one of the biggest ones that I've seen. And even in the midst of schools saying, we want diversity, we're hiring for diversity. Because even with that, I'm like, that's always a flag for us. Because I'm like, we're going to talk inclusion right now. Let's talk history, herstory, theirstory, and exclusion. Like, let's talk full picture, before we say, oh, we're doing this, or we are this, or we want this. Because then, our question, I was like, why now? So because that hasn't been the history of when I look at your heads of schools, your directors, your board, and your leadership teams, and there's data to prove, and look at all this, this is no.
Right.
Stuff. Because no one's doing stuff for optics. And as Dr. Jennifer Beckwith likes to say, no one's going to come into a house that's on fire. Because I know we're not going to tell people to go there. Because we started to do a little bit of work with recruitment. Right. Focus on our AIELOC schools, and then others, we vet them. Right. Because again, we're not going to put our name on a school that has all these different issues. Right. And people will come back and look at us, Right. And so for us, it is that these international schools really need to deal with their anti-Blackness. Let's just be blunt and just call it as it is. That when I look on the continent of Africa and I don't see, let's start with just African leaders at some of these international schools, let alone anyone else, that's a problem, and when I hear students at the school, either alumni or current students, saying, when is there going to be someone on the leadership team that looks like us? in our country, and you're not listening to that, that's a problem, And so, for us, obviously it is to disrupt and dismantle the system that has been in place for since the onset, in international schools. So those statements like, because I've seen her, we want a white man. I'm like, well, why? What is that going to do? I want someone highly qualified here that cares about kids, number one, and knows how to lead, and understands the nuances of the culture and the country, but y'all some are so fixated on a face. Like, I need high quality, that's what I want to suggest in this context. And so again, for us, it's calling it out, calling it in, and, working towards dismantling and disrupting it. So
let me ask you this then, because you've worked with a lot of schools, you worked with a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Some interactions are probably more positive than others. Mm-hmm. Looking at the international school landscape, where have you encountered, or the folks you work with encountered the pushback?
Ooh, good question. To be honest, it's everywhere. Okay, I'm just being honest. I feel like people are still in that they do what they're comfortable. They do what's comfortable, meaning let's read a book. Let's go to this PD. Let's invite such and such in to talk to it. I'm like, show me accountability and action plan and how you monitoring it. Show me your strategic plan. Show me some data, and show me that it's a community-wide effort that everyone knows, not siloed in places. And so that's what we focus on, because when folks come and say, hey, we're interested in being an AIELOC school. Mm-hmm. Here's the list. Here are the expectations. I know. And we know you probably don't have all of them in place, but we expect you to be working towards them, and we're going to support you.
That's the most gracious response. In the meme back of your head or back of your mind, you're like, you know what? First of all, we know how raggedy the situation is. This is why you're here. Right. And here's the thing. And I was talking about something off there, but here's where I think is sometimes when you're a leader of something like this, you always have to be mindful of people wanting you to co-sign on stuff just so that they can say, yes, we are diverse. Yes, we are inclusionary. Right. Yes, we have equity. There's equity, because they know you've got a name and that name has power and you've got influence, right? Yep. And it's always like, but this is work. Like, this isn't just, and this is work for everyone, right? Because I think all of us have our blind spots and our biases. So it's not even like, I'm not even mad that you have that, right? Because I've got my own, but it's the reality is, do you truly authentically want to make this better? Because one of the things that I always wonder, it's not that I wonder, I think that sometimes it's a cop out, but whatever, is, when you look at international schools, do people also want to kind of hide behind the parents?
Oh, yeah.
But the thing is, they haven't actually involved the parents or asked the parents. Well, they just want to assume, our parents wouldn't want that. Exactly. Did you ask them?
Exactly. Right. And where do your parents want their kids to go to school and universities? And in what context? And then think about that context that they're going to be in. And it's like you said, did you even ask them? And it's like, if the parents are that difficult, you know what I mean? Because it's always parents, plural. I'm like, well, who are you? I'm like, who are they? Point them out. Where are they at?
Right.
How are you engaging and enlightening and informing? And what's your parent learning plan look like? You know what I mean? What's your PLP look like?
Right.
So, I think it is. It's been to me, it's one of those deflectors. It's one of those, I wait for them to say it. Because I know me.
They say, well, our parents want, and I know you have been vocal, and there's some folks who've been even more vocal, especially with the native English speaker thing, right? So we want teachers who are native English speakers. And I think all of us who particularly have grown up in countries that are multi and bilingual, what you want is a certain accent.
Right.
But you can't say it without sounding like a jackass.
Or
right?
Let's be real.
Right? Yeah,
like be real.
You can't say You can't say what I want is someone
Exactly.
that sounds like James Bond and Daniel Craig or whatever.
Exactly.
So what I'm going to say is, because I know some of you never actually have thought about this because you haven't been in this space. What you're saying is, well, a native English speaker, and then this is how you come around it, i.e., an American, a Canadian, a Brit, an Australian, and New Zealand, right? But then I'm like, oh, so does that apply to maybe somebody who's German?
Right.
And speaks it because,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Does that apply to, and even with a Canadian, they could be French Canadian and they know English.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right.
You say you have to unpack it. You have to unpack what it says, what it means, and who they want, and keep going.
Right? It's like, and then why do you want that?
Exactly. Because it's in an international school. So it's like the name alone should tell you you're going to be around everybody.
I mean, you already know my thoughts about this because I'm pretty sure I shouted it out at one of your conferences one time where I said, look, we can cut the kumbaya crap. Look, here's the deal. Here's the deal. So here's the deal. We say we're trying to create global citizens. Are we, or are we just trying to replicate the systems that we have in place because they're comfortable for us? And are we actually trying to create nice Western citizens, even when the kids are not Western, right? So here's my point. You can have a school in Asia. It can be predominantly Asian, right? But if curriculum is reflective from a Western stance completely, and it's taught through a Western lens with Western accents, y'all need to kind of stop with this whole, like, we're international, we're diverse. No. Right. You're trying to replicate really nice a Western model,
right?
That may or may not be applicable. And to your point, I think the work that you're doing and the work that AIELOC is doing, it's not even for me just about the educators or the leaders, but it is about the students, right? Because fundamentally, anyone who becomes an educator, truly, at least one who's a healthy educator, it's about the students.
Right.
And if we've got students in international schools, right, why wouldn't you want to expose them to different accents, different languages, leadership that reflects the greater community, right? Because that's the world we live in.
Exactly. That's all I say. You got to unpack when people say intercultural, competent, global.
You know the words.
World. Global citizenship. You have to unpack it. Like, what does that actually mean?
Oh my gosh. Right. Global citizenship kind of kills me sometimes. Like, I get it in theory, but then I'm like, that's not what you're doing though.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
That's not what you're doing.
Not even aware of like local artists, musicians, wherever you're situated. And it's like, there's no.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, and I will say, I feel like because there is a growing awareness and because there are groups like AIELOC, it's getting better. When I look at my peers who are my age, a little bit younger, and kind of coming through international schools during those times, the bubble was, I'm not saying the bubble has gone away, but the bubble was hardcore real in some places. And so let me ask you this, you've got the annual conference. There is so much work that you're doing with AIELOC, and clearly you've explained why there's a need for it. What do you think's in the future for y'all? What do you think? What do you think as someone who has done this work? What do you think's in the future?
Yeah, no, good question. I think for us, when I look around our big three, which is advocacy, learning, and research. So when I look day to day, week to week, month to month, those are the three words I'm looking at. So growing when it comes to, because we had our meeting today, and our advocacy is about to be fire. That's all I'm going to say.
That's cool.
It's going to be fire. But when it comes to self-advocating, being able to advocate for yourself, group situations, we're really growing in honing that component, that aspect of it. And so to see what that's going to look like in action, I'm super excited for that. Research, we got some folks, Dion and Tanisha, who are, I'm going to shout out folks, advocacy, Rama and Cynthia. There can be some other folks added, but Dion and Tanisha, leading up the research, as well as some others, and Odell and Nayoung. But because again, I think the big thing was us researching us, because there was some reports that I saw that came out early on when we were around talking about us, but nobody looked like us had anything to do with the report. And so the great thing is like a lot of doctoral PhD ED students who are you're seeing more and more studies for us by us. And so again, it's to amplify and put that out there.
You know what, you're making me think of now Dr. Tiffany Smith, right? Watching her dissertation and really, right. I'm thinking about all these folks, Darnell, who's now doctor as well. I mean, they all I've been doing this long enough to get PhD.
Right. I'm like, we push them, encouraging them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's love too. And like, how can we support, and so anytime we get someone pings me and say, hey, this study, or, when you ping me or anyone's pinging me doing something with the higher ed, we're like shifting it out and pushing it to folks, so they know and are aware. And attending those, their celebrations and things like that. I went to, Tiffany's and Dr. Smith's. And then the learning aspect, I think that's, again, a constant. I should not look up, and people ping us at times if they don't feel comfortable saying. We always say, if you don't feel comfortable saying something, bring to us. So I should not look up and y'all doing something in Asia and y'all ain't got an Asian on the panel. I'm confused.
I'm not. We done seen this so many times.
This is in Africa. We're but I'm confused when I'm looking at the panelists like
and not a one.
Make sense for me, please. And so for us it is, and because I think we've gotten to the point now where we want to sort of put out, because I know when I get asked to speak, I always ask, coming back to us, because our focus really again, there's a whole bunch of isms we know, but racial and gender equity is sort of our core. Yeah. Not to say there's not a whole bunch of other stuff going on. We acknowledge that and make sure we amplify accordingly. But so when I get asked to speak, I always ask basically who else gonna be there?
That's legit. And to be honest, I'm at the stage where I just bring my own panel. They be like, you go speak. Yeah, I told you I'm doing a speak. I actually brought the panel.
The table is with me.
Right. I don't even wait to sit at the table. They're like, can you speak? I said, I can. But what I'd rather do is bring these 4 people. Mm-hmm. And so
we walk in with our chairs.
I bring it with the table clamp. Look, I got the chicken, the sides, everything. It's like,
who got the silverware?
I know these people hate me right now. I literally got asked to speak the other day and I said, good idea. Mm-hmm. I'm going to bring a panel. That's what you're going to get. Exactly. It's not even going to be me. Right. Because I think what you do is the same thing as you give people the space to hear multiple voices. Because I don't think and me are not gatekeepers.
Exactly.
We're not. And I don't want to be a gatekeeper.
At all. Right. At all.
Too much
about
work.
Community. That's what I'm saying. If it's about me, that's a problem. It's about we.
Right.
So, yeah.
So I'm going to ask you, and I promised I'd ask this $1 million question, and I had to do it with Darnell, so I'm going to ask you this. And I guess you could take a different spin because you are hardcore consulting and doing what you're is right now. So you've been an educator. You've worked with diverse populations, both internationally and locally and nationally. So the question is always, okay, Black educators, especially, I'm going to pick on them, but I can actually pick on maybe some of your Latinos as well, specifically Latina who are coming from the States. Well, why are y'all teaching abroad? Like, don't we got kids here?
Right. They need to see you and experience you and have you. Right. Exactly. Well, the great thing is, look,
you're like, I got the answer.
I know, So, I mean, the great thing with me, with sort of my story and journey is I'm not 100% overseas anymore. So I feel like for personal reasons, after I left my last international school, it left a bad stain, in my mouth, with the leadership. And people can look up right on my LinkedIn and see where that was at. Because I don't even have, I don't even, again, I just tell it like it is. And so, but for me, when I left that institution, I knew in order for me to work in education anywhere, for as much as y'all want to interview me, this is a 2-way street. I got some questions too. I noticed on your school improvement plan. Tell me more about your vision in action. You know what I mean? So again, so as I'm being interviewed, I have questions too. And so if you can't meet my standard, it's a no. But the great thing is, now when it comes to more of the international schools, it is more in a consultant thought partnership work environment. And then I'm back. My feet are, I got my feet in the US too. So the work that I'm doing with mid-school math, the work I'm doing with urban teachers, especially around Black male educators talk. And then we're doing some stuff for urban teachers with males of color in education. So I'm mentoring some new teachers. I was back in the classroom during the height of the pandemic from 2019 to 2021. I have teachers that
I remember. I was a little shocked because we had a call and I was like, where are you at in the classroom? It's lunch. I was like, the heck?
I know. I was like, wait, what?
I was like, that's a class. Okay. I mean,
I know. And so I'll be with them soon, coming up. I'm towards the end of the year, I tend to go back and work right back with those teachers in their classrooms. So I'll see them soon. So that's the nice part is I feel like I've always had my feet in both places.
Yeah.
So when I came home, it was like, what opportunities, how can I give, how can I serve in some capacity? And so even future, I mean, there's a nonprofit idea that I've had for the last year, but it's just finding the time and the space to craft it. But it deals with, again, something that when I went back into the classroom, I saw missing, even in schools that are tagged international backward IB, globally, I saw that it was missing, especially when it came to boys of color, that I look forward to crafting and presenting to the world.
And I think that that's what's powerful about the work you do. Yeah, we focused it on AIELOC, but you're doing and implementing a lot of the things with what you're doing nationally in the States, right?
Yep.
As well as in other places, but particularly in the States. And so one thing I have realized with especially these educators of color, they always find a way, particularly if they're American, to leverage and use their gifting to still sort of support the populations that they left at home, whether it's consulting, coaching, teaching, creating content, as well as being these amazing educators abroad. So, all right, Kevin, we did it. We actually told your story succinctly enough.
That's the story right now.
So here's what I like to tell you, those of you who are listening in as our audience. The deal is this: AIELOC. First of all, if you go to our website, you can find AIELOC. If you go to our social media, you can find AIELOC, which is the Association of International Educational Leaders of Color. Yes, I got it. .org, right? Yep. AIELOC.org. He is on social media. If you look up Kevin Simpson, and you can get that acronym, or literally just follow us. But we will also have all your stuff, your links in our show notes. Awesome. They are already on the website, but with your, we'll still make it up there, and when this podcast episode drops. And so, Kevin, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for the time and just, again, opportunity to reflect and think about, past, present, and future.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I know that 2023, believe it or not, it's going to be really amazing with what you've got coming down the pipeline.
Oh, yes.
You've just listened to an episode of The Global Chatter, which is hosted by me, Amanda Bates. It is edited by Stephanie Ficcio. Don't forget to subscribe to The Global Chatter on your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow us on Instagram at The Global Chatter, or stop by Twitter and find us at Global Chat Pod. If you have a question, want to subscribe to the newsletter, or are interested in sponsoring, visit theglobalchatter.com.